My manager said I'm not paid enough to care that much, so I cared exactly as much as my paycheck. I worked quality control at this mid-sized pharmaceutical packaging company. Nothing glamorous. We bottled supplements, vitamins, over-the-counter medications, 50 employees, fluorescent lights, and the constant hum of conveyor belts. I'd been there 7 years, catching problems before they became recalls. My manager, Randall, was this former sales guy who got promoted because he golfed with the owner. He didn't understand manufacturing, but he understood spreadsheets and quarterly bonuses. For 7 years, I'd been the guy who stayed late when batches looked off, who called suppliers at midnight when ingredients seemed wrong, who stopped production lines if label alignment was even slightly incorrect, saved the company from 3 potential recalls just by caring about details nobody else noticed. Then corporate announced budget cuts. My annual review came back with no raise. When I asked Randall about it, he leaned back with this patronizing smile. Look, you're doing fine work, but let's be realistic. You're not paid enough to care that much. This job is just checking boxes and running tests. Save the passion for something that actually matters. I just nodded and went back to my station. No argument, no drama, just started doing exactly what my job description said and nothing more. Week 1 looked normal on the surface. I ran my scheduled tests, recorded results, signed off on batches that met minimum specifications, but I stopped checking things that weren't explicitly required, stopped testing samples beyond mandatory counts, stopped questioning supplier certificates that looked slightly off. A vitamin C batch came through with color slightly darker than usual. Old me would have held it for additional testing, called the supplier, investigated the raw material source. New me checked the spec sheet, saw it fell within acceptable range, and approved it for bottling. 2 days later, customers started complaining the vitamins tasted bitter and weren't dissolving properly. Turns out the supplier had switched ascorbic acid sources without telling us, technically within spec, but lower quality that affected the final product. We had to issue a voluntary recall on 40,000 bottles, cost the company 300,000 in returns, and destroyed customer trust with our biggest retailer. Randall called me into his office, stressed. Why didn't you catch this? I ran the required tests. Everything was within specification according to the quality manual. You always do extra checks though. That was me caring more than my paycheck covered. Week 3 brought the labeling incident. Our printer produced allergy medication labels where the warning text was slightly faded. You could still read it if you looked carefully, but it wasn't the crisp black we usually demanded. Old me would have rejected the entire run immediately. New me measured the contrast, confirmed it passed the threshold by 0.03%, and approved 12,000 units for distribution. 3 customers ended up in the hospital because they couldn't read the drug interaction warnings clearly enough. The subsequent investigation cost us 800,000, plus the FDA sent inspectors who found nothing wrong with my approvals because I'd followed every written requirement perfectly. They couldn't fault me for not exercising judgment beyond what was documented. That's when Michelle, the CEO, started asking questions about why our incident rate had suddenly exploded after years of clean operations. Month 2 was when everything truly collapsed. A batch of prenatal vitamins came through with a weird chemical smell. Not strong enough to fail our odor test protocol, but definitely noticeable if you paid attention. Old me would have quarantined it immediately and run additional tests. New me followed the standard odor assessment procedure, which involved 3 random samples smelling normal enough to pass, approved for distribution. 2 weeks later, pregnant customers started reporting nausea and headaches beyond normal pregnancy symptoms. Turns out a cleaning chemical had contaminated the production line in trace amounts, not enough to trigger our standard tests, but enough to cause problems with daily use. The recall hit the news. Our stock dropped 18% in 1 day. Class action lawsuit filed within a week. The emergency board meeting was something I'd been expecting. Michelle wanted answers for how we'd gone from industry-leading quality to 3 major incidents in 2 months. Randall came prepared with presentations about updated protocols and additional testing requirements. Michelle cut him off and looked directly at me. You've been here 7 years. You've prevented recalls before. What changed? I pulled up my laptop and showed them everything. Call logs where I used to contact suppliers about concerns that weren't violations but seemed off. Email threads where I'd questioned batches that technically passed but didn't feel right. Production reports where I'd stopped lines for issues that weren't explicitly forbidden but went against my experience. 7 years of caring beyond my job description, catching problems through judgment and intuition that couldn't be written into a quality manual. Then I showed them my last performance review, where Randall had explicitly told me I wasn't paid enough to care that much, complete with his quote about just checking boxes and running tests. I'm following my job description exactly as written now. Everything I've approved has met documented specifications. The incidents happened because specifications can't cover every scenario. They need someone who cares enough to use judgment beyond minimum requirements. Michelle stared at Randall with an expression that could melt steel. You told him to stop caring about quality at a pharmaceutical company? The CFO interrupted with calculations showing my extra vigilance had prevented an estimated 4 million in potential recalls over 7 years. 2 weeks later, I got promoted to Director of Quality Assurance with a $60,000 raise, full authority to stop any production line for any reason, and a mandate to rewrite our quality standards to explicitly include judgment calls based on experience. Randall got moved to a purchasing coordinator role where his love of following minimum specifications without caring about outcomes couldn't endanger customers. I went back to doing what I'd always done, except now my compensation actually matched my responsibility, and nobody could tell me that caring about pharmaceutical safety was above my pay grade.